In the churning waters of the Persian Gulf, hundreds of giant oil tankers queue like sitting ducks, waiting to squeeze through a 33-kilometer-wide bottleneck, the Strait of Hormuz. Below them, warships patrol, tensions simmer, and a single missile, a single blockade could grind the world's oil supply to a halt. But thousands of kilometers away, a silent network of steel pipes hums quietly, moving millions of barrels of oil every day, bypassing this chaos entirely. 20 years before the crisis even began. This is China's $100 billion energy diversification megaproject, and it's one of the most foresighted strategic gambits in modern history. Here are the numbers that will stop you in your tracks. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's oil, over 20 million barrels every single day. Once, 85% of China's imported crude oil passed through this single fragile channel. But today that number is less than 10%. All because China built 3 transnational oil pipelines, stretching over 7,000 kilometers, at a cost of $100 billion, all completed 20 years before Iran's 2025 threat to shut the strait down. But before you ask how China pulled this off, you need to understand why this wasn't just a project. It was a matter of national survival. By the early 2000s, China had become the world's second largest oil consumer, dependent on imports for over 50% of its energy. Every time tensions rose in the Strait of Hormuz, whether from US-Iran standoffs, piracy, or political unrest, China's economy hung by a thread. A single closure would send oil prices soaring to $120 per barrel, shut down factories, leave millions of cars without fuel, and cripple a nation racing to develop. It was like building a house with only one door. If that door slams shut, you're trapped with no way out. Think about what that means for a country of 1.4 billion people. Families would face skyrocketing gasoline prices. Factories that make everything from smartphones to cars would grind to a halt, putting millions out of work. Hospitals would struggle to keep generators running, and rural communities would lose access to heating in winter. China's economic miracle was built on energy, and that energy was held hostage by a single strait on the other side of the world. China needed a bold plan, something that would break this stranglehold, not just react to it. In 2004, China's top energy strategists made a proposal that sounded like science fiction: build 3 massive transnational oil pipelines connecting China to oil-rich Kazakhstan, Myanmar, and Russia, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely and doing it all in less than 10 years. This wasn't a last-minute fix, it was a 20-year master plan. For 3 full years before construction even began, teams used satellite mapping, drone surveys, and deep Earth seismic sensors to map every inch of the 7,000-kilometer route. They faced deserts where temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius, jungles teeming with venomous snakes and monsoons, and earthquake zones where the ground shifted 5 centimeters every year. No country had ever attempted to build pipelines across such diverse, brutal terrain, let alone 3 at once. The goal was simple on paper, but nearly impossible in practice. Build 3 pipelines that could carry 100 million tons of oil per year, withstand extreme heat, freezing cold, and earthquakes, connect to China's domestic energy grid, and do it all 20 years before the Strait of Hormuz crisis became a global threat. Before a single section of pipe was laid, engineers had to face their first, most unforgiving enemy, the desert. The Kazakhstan-China pipeline would cut through the Karakum Desert, where sand dunes shift like water, and the sun bakes the ground hot enough to melt plastic. This wasn't just building a pipeline, it was trying to lay a garden hose on a pile of loose sand, knowing it would sink, shift, or crack within days. The problem was simple. Desert sand doesn't hold anything. It's like trying to build a tower out of dry sand at the beach. No matter how hard you pack it, it crumbles. Add the blistering heat, and steel pipes expand and contract, cracking at the seams. To fix this, engineers used a trick anyone who's played in the sand can understand. Mix sand with a binding agent, like adding water to dry cement. They injected a special concrete grout deep into the sand, turning loose dunes into solid ground, like turning a pile of flour into bread dough. Then they wrapped each pipe in a corrosion-resistant coating, like putting sunscreen on skin to protect it from the desert sun. It was a simple solution, but never used on a pipeline this long, in a desert this harsh. Now here's the part that will blow your mind. This wasn't just one pipeline, it was 3, each facing its own nightmare. If the desert was tough, the Myanmar-China pipeline was a death sentence for any ordinary construction team. Stretching 2,400 kilometers, it cut through the Hengduan Mountains, a region with 3 highs and 4 actives: high seismic intensity, high ground stress, high geothermal heat, and active tectonic movement, active geothermal water, active external geological forces, and active slope reconstruction. Let's talk scale first. The Myanmar pipeline's Langchang River crossing is a 280-meter-long suspension bridge. Standing 1,363 meters above the river, taller than 4 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other. It had to withstand 12-level hurricanes, with winds hitting 33.6 meters per second, strong enough to blow a car off the road. Each section of pipe here is 1.016 meters in diameter, wider than a grown man, and weighs 40 tons, about the same as 5 SUVs. Lifting them onto the bridge was like hoisting a small elephant into the sky, using cranes that could reach higher than a 40-story building. The micro-miracle? The Yuangchun Trench crossing, a 30-meter deep underwater chasm that had stumped another international construction team for over a year. China's engineers tackled it by working with the monsoon seasons, using underwater robots to lay the pipe like a giant snake slithering along the seabed, all while fighting strong currents and near-zero visibility. It was like trying to thread a needle while swimming in a storm, but they did it in 100 days flat. Then there's the Russia-China pipeline, the longest of the three at over 4,000 kilometers. It cuts through Siberia's frozen tundra, where temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius in winter, cold enough to freeze diesel fuel solid. Steel becomes brittle in that cold, like a glass cup left outside in a blizzard. To solve this, engineers heated the pipe as they laid it, using portable heaters that worked like giant hair dryers, and buried it 2 meters deep in the permafrost, like tucking it under a thick blanket to keep it warm. The pipeline can even bend with the frozen ground as it expands and contracts, flexible like a rubber hose, so it doesn't crack. By 2014, all 3 pipelines were fully operational, 20 years before Iran's 2025 threat to close the Strait of Hormuz. The impact was immediate and transformative. A barrel of oil that used to take 30 days to travel from the Middle East to China via tanker now takes just 3 days through the pipeline, like swapping a slow boat for a bullet train. Before the pipelines, 85% of China's oil was at the mercy of the strait. Now less than 10% is. When global oil prices spiked in 2025, China's prices stayed stable, while the rest of the world panicked. Remember the families facing skyrocketing gas prices? Now they pay the same no matter what happens in the Persian Gulf. Factories that once feared shutdowns now run 24/7, powered by a steady stream of oil. And the countries along the pipelines benefited too. Kazakhstan's oil exports to China tripled, lifting millions out of poverty. Myanmar got new roads, schools and hospitals built alongside the pipeline, turning remote rural areas into thriving hubs. Russia found a reliable market for its oil, strengthening its economic ties with China. Is the project perfect? No. It cost $100 billion up front, money that took years to recoup. The Myanmar pipeline faced setbacks, including landslides and occasional leaks that caused injuries and damage. And building through fragile ecosystems required unprecedented environmental safeguards. China spent over $2 million restoring forests and wildlife habitats along the Myanmar pipeline, and rerouted sections to avoid sacred temples and nature reserves. But when Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in 2025, the world got a front-row seat to China's foresight. While other nations scrambled to find alternative routes, China's pipelines kept flowing, unfazed. This wasn't luck. It was 20 years of planning, engineering genius, and the courage to do what no one else dared. If you made it this far, you just witnessed how China outsmarted a global crisis before it even started. No last-minute panics, no desperate deals, just long-term thinking and unyielding determination. That's what this channel is all about. Uncovering the hidden mega projects and strategic moves that shape our world, before they make headlines. If you could solve one global crisis before it happens, whether it's energy, climate, or conflict, what would it be, and how would you do it? Drop your answer in the comments below.